The African American exodus to Kansas in 1879 is a remarkable chapter in American history, reflecting both the resilience of African Americans and the complexities of post-Civil War Reconstruction. Known as the Exodus Term Movement, this mass migration was driven by a confluence of social, economic, and political factors that shaped the lives of thousands of African Americans seeking freedom and opportunity in the American West. The origins of the Exodus Term Movement are deeply rooted in the aftermath of the Civil War and the subsequent period of Reconstruction. While the end of the Civil War in 1865 and the abolition of slavery promised new opportunities for African Americans, the reality of Reconstruction proved far more complicated. Despite the legal end of slavery, African Americans in the South continued to face severe racial discrimination, violence, and economic hardship. The promise of 40 acres and a mule, a popular but ultimately unfulfilled promise made by Union leaders to former slaves, remained largely unfulfilled. By the late 1870s, African Americans were increasingly disillusioned with the lack of progress and protection afforded to them under Reconstruction policies. The rise of Jim Crow laws, which enforced racial segregation and disenfranchised black citizens, compounded their frustration. Additionally, the economic depression of the 1870s, known as the Panic of 1873, exacerbated the plight of many African Americans who struggled with high unemployment rates and deteriorating living conditions. In this context of dissatisfaction and despair, a significant migration movement emerged. Inspired by the promise of land and opportunity in the West, thousands of African Americans began to make their way to Kansas, which was seen as a land of potential prosperity and freedom. Kansas had been a battleground during the prelude to the Civil War, known for its violent conflicts over the issue of slavery. It had become a symbol of freedom for many African Americans due to its role in the abolitionist movement and the relative opportunities it offered. The migration to Kansas was spearheaded by several key figures who were instrumental in organizing and promoting the movement. One of the most notable leaders was Benjamin Pap Singleton, a former enslaved man who had become a prominent advocate for African American colonization in the West. Singleton, along with other leaders such as the Reverend Hiram Revels and John Brown Jr., actively encouraged African Americans to migrate to Kansas, seeing it as a means of escaping the oppressive conditions of the South and creating a new life in the West. The journey to Kansas was fraught with challenges. Many of the migrants, often referred to as exodusters, were former slaves who had little more than their resolve and meager resources. The journey required significant planning and effort, as they had to arrange for transportation and gather supplies. Despite these obstacles, the promise of a better life and the hope of escaping racial oppression motivated thousands to undertake the arduous journey. Upon arrival in Kansas, the exodusters faced a new set of challenges. While the land was indeed available and promises of freedom and opportunity were real, the settlers had to contend with the harsh realities of frontier life. They faced difficulties such as harsh weather conditions, lack of infrastructure, and the need to build new communities from scratch. The work was grueling and the resources limited, but the exodusters persevered. The communities that emerged from this migration were characterized by a strong sense of solidarity and self-reliance. African American settlers established towns and communities, such as Nicodemus, which became a symbol of their perseverance and ambition. These communities were not only a testament to their desire for self-determination, but also a reflection of their ability to overcome adversity and build new lives in challenging conditions. Despite the optimism and determination of the exodusters, the movement faced significant setbacks. The economic and social difficulties in Kansas were considerable, and many settlers struggled to achieve the prosperity they had hoped for. The economic depression continued to impact the region, and the promise of abundant land and opportunities was not always fulfilled. Additionally, the movement encountered resistance from some local residents and political figures who were wary of the influx of African American settlers. The Exodus term movement ultimately faded as many settlers faced hardships and chose to relocate or return to the South. However, the legacy of the migration remained significant. It demonstrated the enduring spirit of African Americans in their quest for freedom and opportunity and highlighted the complexities of post-Civil War American society. The Exodus term movement is a poignant chapter in the larger narrative of African American migration and settlement. It reflects both the struggles and the triumphs of African Americans as they sought to redefine their lives in the wake of slavery and demonstrates the ongoing challenges they faced in their pursuit of equality and justice. The story of the Exodusters is a powerful reminder of the resilience and determination of those who sought a better life in the face of tremendous adversity.